We're preparing kids for jobs that don't exist yet while still teaching them like it's 1985 and it's back to the future. What? While most schools ban AI and cling to outdated methods, forward thinking leaders like you, the ruckus maker watching, and today's guest, Rita Pergolizzi-Wentworth, are building future fluent learning environments. At Pine Street, her school in Manhattan, students spend the day creating AI powered companies, immersed in language programs like Mandarin, and developing the cultural intelligence that they'll need in an interconnected world. Here's what's truly terrifying. Every day we delay preparing kids for tomorrow's reality, we're setting them up to be completely irrelevant in a world that's changing exponentially. This is happening right before our eyes. The gap in education between traditional methods and what students actually need, it's widening at light speed. But Rita discovered something in the jungles of Costa Rica that completely changed how she thinks about balance in education. And it's not what you'd expect from someone who once wanted to be a spy. I'm Danny Bauer, and this is Better Leaders, Better Schools, the original Ruckus cast for visionary leaders who want to do school different within a traditional system so that they create a campus experience worth showing up for. Thanks to ruckus makers just like you, this show ranks in the top 1% of all shows worldwide, out of nearly 4 million podcasts, too. So once again, thank you for pressing play. Thank you for listening. And we'll be right back after a quick message from our show sponsors. Looking to create the kind of campus experience students never forget? ODP Business Solutions transforms ordinary spaces into extraordinary learning environments. Visit odpbusiness.com/education and let's do school different. That's odpbusiness.com/education. This episode is brought to you by Play Piper. Teachers know that keeping students engaged in STEM can be really tough, and Piper is here to help. Our award-winning STEM kits make science and engineering hands-on, playful, and fun, so students build confidence while building real-world skills. Join educators around the country who are using Piper to inspire future creators. Visit playpiper.com to learn more. That's playpiper.com. If you could differentiate instruction in 20 minutes or less, would you do it for all your students? Well, you can with IXL. Over 1 million teachers use IXL because it empowers them to use effective data-informed instruction. And you can get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. All right, Rita, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Danny. Really happy to be here.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. I want to start with your very interesting route to education. Can you tell us about that path?
Well, yes. I originally went to college thinking, and I tell the teachers this all the time, that I was going to be a spy. I went to Middlebury College, which for those of you that know, it's really heavy on languages and actually prides itself in finding not necessarily spies, but people that perhaps will go in that direction. So I originally studied Russian studies and sociology, anthropology, and as part of my study abroad, I had the opportunity to study in Irkutsk, which is in Siberia, and I taught English to Russian professionals, business professionals, and I just fell in love with teaching. And then came back and said, oh, gosh, I wish I did something along the teaching route instead. And luckily, at that point, had the opportunity to apply for Teach for America, which then parlayed, I got in and it parlayed into over 20 years of working in public and private school education. So luckily, I got that second chance vis-a-vis TFA.
What do you think it was about the espionage and spy life that was interesting to you?
I don't know. I love people. I know that sounds really odd that you would want to be a spy if you love people, but I also love just observing. And I think that is why I ended up going into Montessori, which is really heavy in observation. And, I come from a family, luckily, I grew up in a household where there were many languages. My mother is from Honduras, so spoke to us only in Spanish, and my father from Italy and spoke to us in Italian and Sicilian dialect. And I didn't learn English until I was in kindergarten. And I think that definitely fueled my interest in just languages at large. And yeah, and I had the chance to learn Russian when I was in high school, and it was a tech heavy school that actually started at the brink of the Cold War. So I think that high school experience might have inspired me as well to consider that as a direction. Yeah, I think I get to use whatever those skills would have been for espionage and being ahead of school instead, which requires like really, seeing trends, understanding patterns, just observing not only students, but observing families, observing teachers, and then seeing how to best support them from there. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And maybe we'll get into that, later in the episode. But I think what you're talking about is curiosity, right, and empathy.
absolutely.
This observing people and patterns and that kind of thing. I don't know that I've ever admitted this on the show, but back in sixth grade, I wrote into the FBI.
Oh,
Believe it or
really?
not, I did. I had two in sixth grade, 12 years old, Palatine, Illinois. I had two career paths, right? So FBI was one of them for sure, and I was really, really dedicated to that. I wrote into the FBI and I said, "How do I get in?" Right, and they sent me a packet of stuff, right? For whatever reasons, probably because men mature very slowly. I didn't go that route, right? I was having just too much fun and probably disqualified myself from the FBI ranks. The other route was to be a cartoonist or like a comic book, artist, because that's how I fell in love with reading. So I could kind of relate a little bit,
Yeah.
into the spy, FBI, CIA sort of life. But that's where it goes. And I feel like too, a spy would say I would want to be a spy, but I'm not currently one. Like I feel like that's what one might say. Okay, we'll stop there. To more interesting things, you built a school in the jungle of Costa Rica.
That's right.
And I love talking about how ruckus makers do school different. That is living it out, right?
Yeah.
And so can you bring us to the jungle and what your school experience was like there?
Yeah. So, again, so much of this is luck and just being in the right place at the right time and a bit of who you know and sort of who you're open to knowing, right? And so my husband, then boyfriend, and I were backpacking, and we ended up in Costa Rica last after like a 15 country journey. And
Mm,
we were so open to this idea of living outside of the United States. And, my parents at that point were younger. We didn't have kids of our own. We weren't even married yet. It felt like the right time to do it. And so we did. And, my husband at that time could work remotely, which had its own challenges in the jungle, that's a whole different
s-
podcast. And I was like, I really want to continue what I've been doing in education. And so I became acquainted with 5 families interested in starting this Montessori to international baccalaureate school that had always been the vision. And at first it was going to start with like 18 months through 6th graders, and eventually way down the line it would extend or expand into the high school or the middle to high school. And so that had always been the vision. And I was like, yeah, if you want me to tag along, I'd love to. And so together we really just put forward this vision, and the school went from having like 30 children its first year, and by the time I left it had 120, and I believe now it's at around
mm,
400 students. And it is
wow.
now a Montessori to international baccalaureate school. And one of the things that even back then we took great pride in was like really taking advantage or leveraging the environment and making sure that children had access to this ultimate science lab, and really, really learned what it meant to be stewards of the earth. And so, actually, one of the founders, she started this program while she was obviously doing the work with us called Guardians of Nature. And it was all about us being, meaning the school, which is Del Mar Academy or is Del Mar Academy, piloting these ideas, these activities, these programs from everything from, field day and how we can use recycled materials instead of other objects for things like field day, all the way to how do we get children involved in monitoring how much energy we're using, how much water we're
Mm,
consuming, and then like the older students creating graphs and sharing with us all of this data. And so a lot of the work that we put into sort of the environmental education at Del Mar Academy has now spawned into these programs that are found at the district and national level in Costa Rica. I mean, she has just taken this seed and has blown it up. And so it's really special to know that, we all came together. And so the school
Mm.
obviously is doing well, but beyond the school, there's been an impact. And yeah, so it was a really, really neat project to be a part of. And of course, I'm still very, not necessarily involved, but in touch with what's going on there. And it's a beautiful school. Very proud of it.
Yeah. And thank you, for bringing us to this moment, I guess, of guardians of nature, guardians of the world. What would you say, Anna Rita, to like a ruckus maker listening who's like, well, that's easy to do in the jungles of Costa
Yeah.
Rica. I'm in the middle of Kansas, right? And so what does doing school different sort of look like for me? And I don't expect you to be a expert on Kansas life, but my point is maybe like what are some of the design principles or leadership, principles, like those first steps that a leader might take just when reimagining the education experience.
Yeah. I think I, I I think about this quite a bit, especially being now in the context of New York City and sort of
Mm-hmm.
when we're talking about supporting holistic development, supporting the whole child. I often think of balance, and that's something that I know here at Pine Street School, where I'm currently at, where my own children attend school. We think about that a lot. And so when it comes to balance, it's like if you are in a rural school, if you're in a place like Costa Rica and you're in a jungle or wherever you may be, like what is the deficit there? Like what is missing? And so how can you offset that somehow? And the same thing here being in the city, it's like we have access to so many different things. We have access to so many different languages, to so many museums, to so many different types of opportunities. But, we may not necessarily have as much access to the natural world. And so therefore, it's just really putting forward wherever you are, what is it that's missing and what are some of the even small steps you can take to maintain or find that balance so that the child does have a varied, all these varied opportunities. Because I do think that's how you build cultural intelligence, right? That's how
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you build this overall human if they do continuously have access to a bunch of different things. So yeah, balance. I'd say that's
Perfect.
the big one.
You mentioned your kids go to Pine Street with you. How
Yes.
did having those kiddos challenge you to change education?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. I started off as a teacher in the city, and I started off in a pretty traditional environment, I would say. And I remember leaving that context when I had gone to Costa Rica and I was already seeking something else. I felt that education needed to be a little bit more hands on and needed to be about listening to
Mm-hmm.
children and their questions and just like exploding their learning and their understanding from there. And then when my first child was born, what I was seeking became a lot more pronounced. I remember that, like, all of a sudden, I was like, this is beyond urgent. It was urgent before, and it became even more. I
Right.
felt he needed to learn with his hands. I felt that, I didn't call it this back then. I don't know, maybe perhaps the term had existed, but I was really thinking about what it meant to be future fluent. And I remember,
Mm.
yeah, I remember thinking, like, how are we going to prepare him for the unknowns of the future? And how do we continue to nurture aspects of what it means to be human, especially with all of these like different types of technologies and what they can end up becoming? And this is like before AI. So when we moved back to New York, I was not really interested in placing him in a school that had been steeped in tradition or that wasn't easily adapting to their surroundings, either because of their governance structure or alumni promises, which frankly I understand. Like there are schools that just they have those constraints and I get it, but I didn't want
Mm.
that for him. I didn't want that for our family. I was looking for this place that was going to think outside of the box to again achieve this balance to support him in being a well-rounded individual. And I found it at Pine Street School, a place where they were teaching languages. They were using the International Baccalaureate, which is known around the world for being this really well-balanced approach or curriculum framework. It obviously had this element of being stewards of the environment. There was so much to it that I was like, wow, this is like the perfect place for my child. And it was young. And
Mm.
so,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of being a ruckus maker, like a lot of people won't take a chance on a young school because they're like, oh, I want to invest in something that's been around for 50 to 100 years. But often after being involved in a school like Del Mar, where I got to sort of watch the pioneer students not only attain their academic education through us and obviously their holistic education through us, but also that
Mhm.
added element that they were the pioneers or are the pioneers. There's an education within an education when a child knows they were the first in a school. They
Yeah.
were the first to help build policies around things, or they were the first, like even now with our student government, they're the first that are going to leave behind like these legacies from things like Spirit Week to, who we donate items to it during, let's say, Thanksgiving time. I mean, they have a real big say on the direction of the school. And I just thought that that was so powerful. So for both my husband and for me, we were like, of course, Pine Street School. Who cares if it's only been around 2 to 3 years? Like we're taking the leap. And then that's actually how I learned about Pine Street School for my own job later on. It started off as a parent and then it parlayed into working for its sister school, Battery Park Montessori. And now, obviously, I'm here. So, yeah, it all started off as a parent.
The interesting tension there too is that sometimes, American parents really in a sort of startup culture when it comes to business. But if it's school, it has to be this, 50 to 100-year established type of thing, maybe for some folks. But yeah, I really like the sort of like startup education culture and building something new. And
Yeah.
not only how awesome that is for the adults, but more importantly, like you said, when a kid knows I'm sort of a founding student helping shape this thing, right? And
Yeah.
lead to have real leadership as a young person. What a gift. Well, you mentioned you're at Pine Street now, which is incredible. And I know that you're taking some risks there and that kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
thing. Can you talk a bit about how you're doing that?
Yeah, so going back to harping on this balance piece, I think I guess you wouldn't say it's like really cutting edge, but like we really think about it, it's like, where is
Yeah.
it that we can achieve? We are on Wall Street, we are arguably in the heart of the
Hustle.
financial world and the hustle and the bustle. And it's like, how do we again bring nature to our students? And so we think
Yeah.
about that when we do field trips. We think about that when we start our overnight trips. We send our children to a farm from fifth all the way through eighth grade for team building, but also because of that access to nature. We do international trips starting in sixth grade, and we head to either Costa Rica or Iceland first. We do what's called AD years. I'm sure you're familiar with those. And then their
Mhm.
last year, which would be their eighth grade year, they go to China. And we make sure to incorporate some natural, landscapes in whatever it is that they're going to see on that journey. And then I think we take a stance on tech, but we also take a stance on brain development and what's needed for proper
Mhm.
foundational brain
Mhm.
development. So, for example, we are really keen on the importance of writing and what that does for brain development. Yet
Right.
at the same time, we dedicate a day to 2 days on something called an AI sprint because, frankly speaking, children need to know how to use these tools and need to be prepared for whatever tools come as a result of that. And so, there is a day where children don't do anything in their middle school but create a company using AI, and then they've got to
Wow.
pitch it to
Yeah.
teachers and faculty. And so, some families I would say aren't as comfortable with the way that we apply technology in our learning. We're very much producers of it versus consumers of it. Of course, we're
Mhm.
really mindful of development, like where children are in their early childhood. We're not going to have them have too much access to screens, but starting in
Sure.
kindergarten and up, yeah, we're going to use it as a tool and we're going to prepare the children in using it as a tool as they continue to grow with us. And so we know that that's not for everyone and
Mhm.
that's okay. And so, but yeah, I would say that's something that from the start of this school has made us, I would say, has been a distinguisher relative to how other independent schools might look at tech.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that sort of I think you call it future fluent, perspective, especially when it comes to AI, because even still, like so many systems are sticking their head in the sand as if like it's gonna go away,
Right.
where it's such a new development in innovation. It's only going to be integrated literally in every part of life,
Hmm.
right? Except where you're off the grid. And just like, when computers came on the scene and people couldn't believe that there would be personal computers, right, in people's houses. And I remember, dating myself when we got our first computer, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And now it's like you have multiple ones in the house. The use of AI is going to be like that, but only exponentially more, right? And
Right.
if you don't see that yet, like wake up.
I know.
You must wake up on that piece. So thank you for being a leader there. you mentioned with me in the pre-interview how Pine Street might not be for everybody.
Yeah.
So talk to me like why you say that, but also sort of how you hold that as a leader. Because I think too often a mistake that school leaders make is trying to be everything to everyone. And
Yep.
that's just like that's the quickest path to me to being mediocre and easily forgettable,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
So yeah, can you
Yeah.
riff on that for a while?
I'm pretty, I prior to being at Pine Street, as you know, I'd been at Battery Park Montessori, and I did a lot of
Mm,
honestly just partnering with amazing families on finding their next step besides beyond Battery Park Montessori. Sometimes it would be Pine Street
mhm,
School, and sometimes it would be somewhere else. But what I've learned on that journey and on my own personal journey as a parent of two boys and having to consider like where they're going to go is that every family has to consider what they value. And there are no, at least in Manhattan, and
mhm,
especially if you're looking at private schools in Manhattan and arguably many amazing public schools, especially in certain parts of Manhattan, there are no bad schools, but there are not right fit schools for certain families. So you know, they have to really consider like what does their value, what do they value, where do they see their child, what it is that they hope for their child, because especially if you're looking for a kindergarten, a lot of it is just based on hope and who they think their child may become. It obviously becomes very
mm,
different when your child is looking for a high school, but like at least in the context of Pine Street, what we're looking for are the families that are placing a value on an internationally minded curriculum like the International Baccalaureate. They're placing value on learning a language, whether it be Mandarin or Spanish, and not only seeing the value in learning the language for speaking the language, but also what it can actually do in terms of building reserves for other,
mm,
applying it for other
mhm,
subjects or disciplines. Obviously, we're looking for families that are okay with how we use tech and, see the value and like why we're pushing, like, yes, you got to learn writing, you've got to do all of these really important human skills. At the same time, we've got to prepare them for what's to come. In our context, we're looking for families that really want a small school and are okay with partnering with us as a result of being so small, that are willing to partner with us in this way. And so some families may not want that. Some families might want really bigger schools. Some families may not necessarily want an emphasis on on languages or on tech. And that again is okay. So it's basically just, family has to do the search. They've got to go around. They've got to see what they love. And they've also, at the end of the day, it goes to their gut, to their instinct, which I know
mhm.
we talked a bit about this in the pre-interview too. For me personally, and I know for some of the families, especially those that attend here at Pine, teacher happiness is pretty key. And
Yeah,
so, but again, that's my priority, right? And everyone else has the right to have their own priorities. So
right on. Well, I think this is a good spot to get in some quick messages from our show sponsors. But when we come back after the break, I'd love to dig into that idea of teacher happiness and how you approach it.
for sure.
ODP Business Solutions, formerly Office Depot Business Solutions Division, has been a trusted partner for schools for 30 years. At ODP Business Solutions, we're by your side to meet your evolving education needs. Now, picture this: a learning environment so engaging students forget to check their phones. Sounds impossible? That's exactly what we helped Belago Academy create. Their secret? Working with ODP Business Solutions to build collaborative spaces that actually work. We didn't just deliver furniture, we delivered a completely new way of learning. From tech integration that makes lessons come alive, to flexible spaces that adapt to any teaching style, to sustainable solutions that reduce your carbon footprint. We're here to help you do school different. And the best part, you get it all from a single supplier, all to help you simplify ordering and streamline budgeting while staying compliant with easy access to cooperative contracts. However, you want to advance, ODP Business Solutions has 30 years of experience helping districts like yours get ahead. Visit odpbusiness.com/education to learn more. That's odpbusiness.com/education. Tomorrow's innovators are sitting in today's classrooms, but only if we help them see what's possible. At Play Piper, we make STEM hands on and approachable through kits that connect kids' natural curiosity with real skills in coding and engineering. Students who once thought, I'm not good at science, begin to discover their own potential. It's about repairing the pipeline and fueling the next generation of creators. To learn how you can inspire future innovators in your school, visit playpiper.com. Go to playpiper.com today to learn more. As a school leader, time is your greatest resource, and there is a real sense of urgency when it comes to getting students what they need right now. That's why I love IXL's Universal Screener. In 20 minutes or less, you can identify students in need of intervention. And IXL's Learning Adaptive platform makes differentiating instruction easy. As students learn, IXL adjusts to the right level of difficulty for each individual student. Get started today at ixl.com/leaders. That's ixl.com/leaders. All right, and we're back with Rita Pergolizzi-Wentworth, and we're talking about Pine Street and teacher happiness. This is an important subject, and taking it seriously, I think, is obviously a way to retain, teachers. And when all the campuses around you are bleeding teachers, and have leaky pipelines in terms of the educator, experience in hiring, focusing on teacher happiness and the current teachers, that's your best, retention strategy.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about like how you promote it and how you approach it.
Yeah. So, going back to what I was saying before with regards to teacher happiness, especially when you're touring, I think not only seeing one teacher happy, but many teachers happy, seeing how they
Mm-hmm.
connect with one another, even if they're not co-teachers, that is essentially the ecosystem that a child is going to be in and day out. It's not just with the adult in the classroom, but even the passing adult in the hallway. And that energy, I genuinely feel, just transfers. And so with that in mind, of course, we think about compensation. That's super important. But
Mm-hmm.
equally important is placing teacher appreciation at the forefront of all of our decisions. So, for example, we just launched our first PTA ever, and they were like, "What do you want us to focus on?" And I was like, "Teacher appreciation, like not just the week in May, but like all of the time.
Yeah,
What is
right.
that?
Yeah.
What does that look like?" It's about clear norms and guidelines so that teachers can operate freely within. I say that for students too, for the classroom. When you have these clear essential agreements, that's when children can really fly. And I think it's the same principles that apply in the classroom. It's the same for teachers. It's looking for opportunities for them to grow as leaders, whether it be presenting or becoming an Apple Distinguished School educator. So here we're an Apple Distinguished School. And so, if any teacher comes up to us and they're like, we want to do this, we're like, we're going to support you. Go take that day and go do that. And, come back and teach us what you've learned. I think a lot of it is about meaningful feedback and finding people that are willing to take that and be open to observing one another. I think when you build that culture of observation from the get-go, it basically allows for that listening that needs to happen in order for us to listen to ourselves, but also to listen to others' views or opinions or, again, observations on what else we can be doing in the classroom. Along the lines of listening, like really really finding multiple ways to get information from teachers on what they think about perhaps any policies that we're going to roll out or areas for growth. So, for example, doing like a SWOT analysis, doing surveys. We do a lot of one-to-one meetings with teachers throughout the course of the year. Obviously, every school is a different size. There's different leadership structures in place, but really putting teachers' opinions and voices at the forefront and finding structured ways to collect that, I think, is super important because, at the end, whether a teacher's opinion or thoughts come to fruition or not, I think what it does is it opens up the space to basically explain to the teachers the whys behind how decisions are made and like why their opinion or their suggestion can or cannot happen at that moment in time. And when that happens, they feel heard, they feel valued. At least I felt that way as I was a teacher. If I
Yeah.
brought someone to someone, even if they weren't going to do it, the fact that I felt heard mattered. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think that's key to the happiness. I know this is going to sound odd, but honestly, just having fun. So we have here at Pine
It's not
Street,
odd at all. Yeah, that's
like,
like
like
really great. Yeah.
it's like We're very lucky. We have a volunteer group of teachers. They come together and they call themselves the social committee. And they do everything from considering people's birthdays to with karaoke night. We have dumpling making, football pools. We have the green book, which is basically a teacher writes a note to another teacher in this green book, reads it out
Okay.
loud in a faculty meeting, and then that next person is up to write a letter to someone else. It's a beautiful
It's like
tradition.
appreciation. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
absolutely. Just showing appreciation and I think just that sense of security, obviously the financial security, like I said before, is super important. But I think teachers, we want for our students when they go in the classroom, like, my teacher's got me, you know,
Hmm.
like my teacher's going to really try to do everything to understand where I'm coming from. And I think that doesn't change when we become adults, that doesn't.
Right.
So we, just like teachers need to advocate for their children, I think the administration, the leadership needs to advocate for teachers.
Mm.
I think sometimes teachers come into contexts where they're like, this parent came and I feel a little bit alone in terms of how I can respond to this parent or my next steps, or I'm going to get in trouble perhaps because I didn't say something in the right way. And I feel
Hmm.
like one of the big things that we pride ourselves in here at Pine Street is that if you've made a mistake, come to me directly. You know, I don't want you to try to hide it. Like, come to me so that I can support. And it comes from a place of let me support you, right? Let me
Yeah, right.
advocate for you. And I think that builds that sense of security that ultimately end up taking more risks. So yeah, that's there's a lot more that I could say about this. This is something that's near and dear to my heart. But I do think that putting at least some of these things in place helps with that retention piece that you were referring to, helps with burnout. That's another big one. So
For
yeah.
sure. So many good things. I want to double click on at least a few parts, but I think most importantly, the idea of getting feedback and then communicating back as a leader, like what you're doing about it, right? Whether you are or not, but then explaining it. Because I think too many schools obviously just operate and they're not even getting feedback from teachers at all. And that's really, shame on you for that. But then the next level is like you're surveying and you're reaching out. And the worst thing you could do is potentially get that feedback, maybe even take action on some stuff, maybe some of the stuff you don't, but you don't share that story. And
Mhm.
so then what happens is the teacher, the faculty says, oh, they asked for feedback and they don't care,
Yeah.
which might not be true. It might be true, but it probably isn't. You just done a poor job saying, here's all the things that people have requested. Here's what we will take action on and what we won't and why, right? Maybe it's not aligned to values, maybe it's timing, funding, like all sorts of stuff.
Right.
But I just really want to emphasize that point because it's a pro communication move and it does lead to teacher happiness, teacher belonging. They get a sense my leader gets me, they hear me,
Yeah.
even when you disagree or you don't take action on, what somebody says. So that was super important. Also, I also want to double click on social committee because that sounds like fun to me,
It's a lot of
and
fun.
in my first book, I said the most magical place on the planet shouldn't be Disney; it should be schools, right? It's really easy to say, well, they got Mickey and they got the funding and the theme parks, and all of that is true. But the similarity between the two spaces is they have the children and their imaginations, which is what makes it special,
Yeah.
right? People don't get that. They think they need the money and the stuff. That's not true. Give a kid like I'll never be surprised because I buy like my nephews, they get the best toys. You know what they like the best? The freaking box the toy comes in, right? They
That's
like
right.
the cardboard box
Yeah.
because it leverages the imagination. And I'm gonna stop. I'm just to be the cardboard box uncle from now on, right? Like there's no point buying toys.
Thank you, Amazon.
Yeah, for sure. But I wanted to double click on social committee because I think it is important. I think it does sound fun and it honors other people. And I know the map's not the territory, meaning on social media, you read something that doesn't speak for everybody. But there's a lot of negativity around like social committees and these kind of things that are really positive and fun. And it sounds like it works well for
Yeah.
you. But yeah, yeah. How to like, I don't know. Are most of the teachers, would you say, like cool with it and engaged and that kind of thing? Because my last thing I'll say, I promise, and then I'll shut
No,
up
no,
because
no.
this is your show. But I feel like if you're the people posting on social that these committees and da 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 like are not good things, right? And childish or whatever, as a leader, find other people to put on your faculty.
Yeah.
Because those folks are just like, not happy.
Yeah.
So why do you want them on your so anyways, what could you add to that?
And that's exactly what I was going to say is that,
Yeah.
I think the selection process when you're recruiting a teacher to come to the schools where it really all starts. Like, don't get me wrong. Like the
Yeah.
social
Yeah.
committee does
Yeah.
things. There's times where we're doing it embedded in a faculty meeting. So of course everybody has to be there. But a lot of the things are optional. We have to understand some of our teachers have families or they have other commitments. They have to go home. So everything is always as optional as it could be. But we do have really strong turnout. And I think it's
Mhm.
because it's on a volunteer basis. It's like we're not
Got it.
mandating them to do any of those things. But I think the reason why we do have big turnout is because from the get-go, we are very clear that there are different types of schools out there. And just like for a family, they have to consider what they value and what they're like signing up for, what they want to quote unquote invest in for their child. It's frankly the
Right.
same for the teacher. Not every school is going to be the perfect marriage for that educator. There's when we're recruiting, they've got to interview with multiple people, they've got to do a demo, and all along we are saying or harping on the importance of collaboration or co-teaching. We're harping on how we are small and therefore we can't manage a toxic environment. We just can't. It's one thing if you can hide in like a classroom of a school that has 1,000+ students. We don't, and we've deliberately been designed to be small. And so that is literally
Mhm.
a part of who the fabric of Pine Street School. And so therefore, we just keep talking about that, not only for the parents, but even as we're recruiting teachers, so that when they come, we're not getting sort of the Debbie Downers that are like, oh man, the social committee's
Mhm.
doing something again, or like football
Yeah.
pool. I don't even know what that is, or whatever the case may be. you know, they're at least willing to do something of the various events or opportunities that we have to just have fun. And I see that and I feel that. I mean, I think post COVID, a lot of schools would say there was a little bit of a disruption just because there was sort of like a
Mhm.
break in that type of community building because we couldn't do certain social things like this. And so coming back from that has been sort of like a rebuilding of team, a rebuilding of culture. But I feel, at least for Pine Street, we were really able to weather that storm because of our size and because of the social committee and just because of the way that we recruit. We got to look for happy people. That's
Yeah.
the bottom
So
line.
that's good. Pine Street clearly has big aspirations, but you mentioned how you want to stay small. Can you define small and like why that's important to you?
Yeah, I think small means, no more than 2 to 3 sections per grade. I think it means, capping classes 15 to 18, no more than that. I think it means always having a structure in place where, even if we get a little bigger than what we are right now, families are always going to feel that they can easily access teachers, they can easily access the administration, the head of school. And I think deliberately small also means more opportunities for children. I find that if you're in a school where there are too many children, it's really easy to hide if you're a kid,
Yeah.
and we
Or a parent too.
or a parent, yeah, absolutely, or a parent too. And as a child, I feel like, if you're in a smaller classroom and they're like, we're doing a performance, guess what? Everyone's going to have to partake in it. Even if you don't want to be on the stage, you're doing sound, you're doing something. Whereas if you're in a really large school, it's like 10 people are vying for the same spot, whether it be helping with tech setup or trying to get the lead part or have any role in a play. Whereas for us, it's sort of like, not everyone's going to be in it. This is
All right.
volunteer. You're just going to do it. And what that does is it's sort of like a type of exposure. It's constant
Mm.
exposure. It's constant confidence building in areas where you may not have even wanted to pursue. And so I think that's something that we've learned and we've watched in our own students. We're seeing our first eighth graders, they're going to be the first ones ever to graduate from us. And we see it in these 13 students. I mean, they're all incredibly different. Some of them are a bit more forward in their approach. Some of them are a little bit more observant, take the back seat. But all of them, you know, despite what they may love or not maybe be as interested in, they've all tried these different things. They've all tried different instruments. They've all been on stage. They've all tried to speak languages. And it's because of this, and I think that adds to the layers of a human being and goes back to the original piece of like just finding balance, right? And the things where, or in the areas where there might be deficits. And that's not just for a building in the middle of the city, but it's also for humans. right? It's that constant balancing act.
Right. Okay. Last question for Pine Street before getting to, the final questions I end with every guest. Just curious how you approach parent partnerships.
Oh, that's one of my favorite topics. I would say it's one of our core strengths. Obviously, there's always room for improvement everywhere, whether it's, building relationships with teachers or obviously building relationships with parents. But I would say because of our size, we've been doing it pretty well over the years. And, it allows us to offer consistent, personalized support to families from nursery ones all the way through middle school. We prioritize active and transparent communication, and we have lots of parent education opportunities to keep families informed and engaged. And, we welcome them to come in to observe so that they could see what's going on in the classroom. And that's all across our grade levels. And I think we are really mindful of where families are in relation to their children based off of the age of their child. And so, for example, there's these shifts that happen in development, from 2 to 3, there's this big shift in independence for a child. And then cognitively, another one happens like at around third grade. And then, when they get to middle school, it's like I don't want to say that they're like preschoolers again, but there's a body and a mind war that's happening akin to what happened in
They're
early
weirdos.
childhood.
Middle schools, most of my careers in middle school, I did high school as well, but I'll say
Yeah.
it so you don't have to. They're weirdos.
Well, there's something there. It's a special time. It's human
It's
development.
a special time. That's right.
And I think, doing a lot of hand holding for parents because you get sort of used to what your child is like. And then all of a sudden there's this shift and you're like, whoa. And it's, how do you support the parent best support their child
Mhm.
through their developmental journey? And so I think we try as best we can to support families wherever they are and put, different teachers, different administrators that are, somewhat experts in these particular areas to speak with parents about this. So yeah, we try. We try, and we can do a lot because we're small.
Fantastic. And Rita, you're putting a message on all school marquees around the world for a single day. What's your message?
I would say, we didn't get a chance to talk too much about languages, and we talked a bit about cultural intelligence, but I would say raise thinkers, embrace humanity, and teach for tomorrow. That would be the marquee across. And I think, we got to let our schools be places where children can become bold, multilingual, deeply empathetic humans, where
Mhm.
relationships matter more than the rules and curiosity is louder than compliance. And honestly, internationalism is a lived experience. And with that, I would say, the world just needs a lot more thinkers that can go across cultures, question deeply, adapt quickly, and with purpose. So, yeah, raise thinkers, embrace humanity, teach for tomorrow.
You're building your dream school. You don't have any limitations in terms of resources. The only constraint is how boldly you can imagine. So, what would be the 3 guiding principles building this dream school?
Yeah, I would say learning must mirror real life. Again, going back to what I said before, finding the balance in whatever that real life is. So if real life in
Mhm.
New York is one way, like where is real life? What is real life like somewhere else? So again, I would say if money was no object, and I do think we do actually a great job of this at Pine Street School, but we can always do more, like more field trips, more global travel, exposure or opportunities for students that they can see how others live and connect with people that they may never imagined they would connect with. And, empathy is built that way. Assumptions are challenged, and
Mhm.
that future fluency that we were talking about, it's forged. I would say the other guiding principle would be that every child deserves to be known, just like every teacher, every human does. And so we should be built around the students and not systems, meaning we should be agile and preparing for what's to come. It's deeply personal, it's rooted in relationships. So we can't be too rigid in our routines. I know there's a heart behind me, but the heart has to be at the center of everything we do, especially for the children.
Yeah.
And then I would say the third guiding principle would be preparing for that future that we can't predict. So to nurture future fluency, equipping students with that mindset, the skills to really pivot, to thrive in the unknown, cultivating curiosity, resilience, that empathy piece, critical thinking, it all feeds into this cultural intelligence, being able to just go from one thing to the other. I think that's going to be one of the most important skills a human can have in whatever the future looks like. So those are the three.
Like, I've enjoyed having you on the show, Anna Rita. We covered a lot of ground of everything we discussed. What's the one thing you want a ruckus maker to remember?
Live boldly. That's something that the colleagues of mine and I say here quite a bit. Just live with passion, live boldly, just do what you got to do to get it done. Hustle.
Hey, Ruckus Maker, thanks again for pressing play. I hope you enjoyed today's episode as much as I enjoyed creating it for you. And before you go, if today's show shifted something in your mind or sparked an idea about how you could do school different, then I think you'd be a great fit for what we call the Ruckus Maker Mastermind. The Mastermind's a private community of innovative school leaders who meet weekly to grow, reflect, and disrupt the status quo. You can create the campus experience your staff and students deserve. Applications are now open, and go to betterleadersbetterschools.com/apply to put your application in.